So yes. Moving back to the presentation slides. The agenda describes about introduction and networking. And as I said, I request you to be interactive in the sessions. Then at 12:15, we'll be starting our API and RAML best practices session, wherein we'll talk about how best practices you can implement in API and RAML. Definitely, it's a day-to-day thing. Then at 1 p.m., we'll look into the power of DataWeave, where we'll see some useful functions, and also we'll see that what are the other usage of DataWeave. And at 1:45, please stay tuned. And there's going to be a quiz, okay, which we have planned. And as you know, the three winners who win the quiz, they'll get the free trainings from the MuleSoft. So I would request you to stay tuned till the end. Organizer. About myself, as I had mentioned, I am a MuleSoft meetup leader for Kochi. Also, I have 7 years of experience in whole of the integration and API technologies. Before MuleSoft, I have worked in the TIBCO technology, in the JBoss Fuse technology. All of my experience was in Accenture. Currently, I'm a technical team lead there. I'm a certified MuleSoft developer, architect, platform architect, certified. And yes, I mean, we'll move forward to speak about the speakers. I request Sanjana to introduce herself.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. I hope you all are healthy and fine. So myself is Mishra. So I have overall experience of 5+ years working in integration solutions. So I am a certified MuleSoft developer and then platform architect. So currently I'm working in Accenture as a senior software developer. So within MuleSoft, and yeah. So looking forward for this session, and I hope you guys find it good. Yes, Sumit.
Yeah, thank you, Supriya and Sanjana. So about myself, I'm Sumit Ahuja. I also 5+ years of IT experience, whole in Accenture. I'm certified MuleSoft developer, and I've done both the architect certifications. First of all, very thank you all of you for joining the call. Very good afternoon to you all of you. I hope you are staying safe. Also, I wanted to tell one news which I've got last night. Like, I am personally being selected to be the organizer for Kochi, with Supriya as a co-organizer. So yeah, looking forward to have a good time with you. Thank you.
Yes. On the same grounds, congratulations, Sumit. Now it's a responsibility to handle this meetup, and we both of us will expect a huge amount of a coordination from all of you all. So thank you so much. So I'll move to the next slide. Sumit, I think over to you. You can start sharing.
Thank you, Supriya. I think I'll just stop my video because due to low bandwidth, I'll start sharing my screen. Just let me know once it's visible.
It is visible, Sumit. Yes.
Visible, right? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, first of all, before we get started, I would just like to throw some light on the agenda of this topic. So this topic is extremely vast topic, a lot of stuffs to cover upon, but due to time constraint, we have came up with some important guidelines and principles and the best practices would say that one should take care of before implementing any API or RAML. So this session will be a mix of API plus RAML best practices. So first of all, I would like to know from all of you, like what comes in your mind when you hear a best practice? Like, what comes in your mind? What strikes, like when you know like a best practice? We have to go for a best practice. So anyone who would like to pick this up?
Set of standards.
Sorry, who is it? I think Supriya, you might see, like who is.
We can reduce the redundancy of the code.
No, that is something kind of you're saying optimization, like.
Best practices are nothing but set of standards.
Okay. Any more? Partially correct.
Kind of a guideline on how to. Kind of a guideline or like how to proceed with this, and to not end up in some messy situation. So it's like a set of rules or guidelines which explains what to do and what not to do for easy readability and whatsoever, easy scalability, whatever we can say.
Yeah, yeah, that is correct. But I would like to
And
throw.
also,
Yeah, sure.
yeah,
Go on.
yes, please. So standard. If you follow standard, so others, other developers, someone comes into the picture. I mean, newly, they can also can adapt the process. If we follow some standard, they can easily adapt it easily, right?
Yes, exactly. So, okay, so I'll just introduce about like what is best practice. I'll just give a overview on. So, what is best practice? Nothing but it's a method or a technique that has been generally accepted as a superior to all the alternatives. And why? Because it produces the results are very superior to those achieved by other means. Okay, and how can you find basically the best practices any field? So finding best practice is simply taking the time to research what you are planning to do and finding the best way to go about it and about getting it done. So just think of a best practice in every little thing you do and watch the result. So that's going to be really amazing. So in every minimal effort of yours, best practices involved. So you just have to go plan and search it for. Okay, so we'll start with quickly what is ramble and why we use it. Again, this is question. This is a question I need to pick it up. So if anyone who wants to answer this question, like why we use ramble and what is ramble.
Uh, this is Vinny. RAML is nothing. I mean, to put it in simple word, it's nothing but a skeleton of an API. How it should look like. Even a novice from outside world, those who don't know exactly about what inside that API could able to get an idea of what this is exactly and get an overview of how it works and what are the expectations. So it's basically a skeleton of that API which is going to be built.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, this is Velu. It is the same, but I will use some different words. It's a
Yeah.
kind of blueprint of the API actually. So how the API, should looks like, what method it should have, what is the mandatory, non-mandatory fields, and what is the security headers it can have. I mean, it's a kind of design. I mean, by seeing the design itself, we can come to know that what exactly that API is doing.
Yep.
If I just add one point here, like RAML, it's just a language. If in my thoughts, it's just a language for communicating different systems.
Okay, so it's not just a language, I would say, but there are many more concepts. I think most of all are being covered by you guys. But yeah, I would like to cover in a more better way. So, what is RAML is basically? First of all, RAML is a RESTful API modeling language, and it's based on YAML kind of basically used to describe your API, and also like what it contains. It contains the URL, your request response structure, the that you are doing, the schemas, the methods, HTTP methods, and its attributes like query parameters, URL parameters, and many more stuff, whatever you want to do on that RAML language. And also RAML helps the client or the consumer of a service to know what the service exactly is, what all the operations are, and how the consumer will invoke their operations, what will be the use of that particular operation, and many more advantages. RAML also helps the developer in creating the initial structure. It's just a go ahead for the implementation. So once your ML is ready, your API is ready, we can go ahead for the implementation. And definitely RAML is already being used for the documentation purpose as well. So yeah, so we'll go on the next slides. So best practice RAML basically includes 6 modules or the 6 I would say definitions. So first one is use specification spec driven development. So what is spec driven development? So yeah, so this is kind of a diagram that I want to explain. So first of all, what is spec driven development? It's just a software development process that uses the API specification as a guide. So there's only one requirement here. You have to write your documentation first without jumping directly to the implementation part. And this process is useful for both actually the API developers as well and all the end user consumers. So the following given processes are the life cycle. These are the life cycles. So I'll just try to explain this diagram. Let me just use, yeah. Okay, so if you see this one, so here the life cycle is getting started. So first phase is a design phase. You have to design your API specification, and then you can simulate using some mocking service, and then you have to simulate with from the public, initiate a public URL and give the URL to the consumers and get their feedbacks. If everything works fine, or if you have to do some modifications, then validate that. And then once you see like your API specification is ready to go, then you can just come out of this inner circle. That is nothing but your API specification is done, and the outer circle denotes is nothing but the API build. Then you will start your build. Once you see your build is completed, then you go for a testing. Once you see this inner circle, outer circle is also getting completed, then you go again, come outside, and then you have to come into the management section, where you are securing your API, maintaining your API, monitoring your API, troubleshoot and manage. So this is kind of a software development lifecycle, which includes in a spec driven development. So before, if we are not ready with our API specifications, we should not go for, we should know, we should not go for build. If you're not ready for the build, we should not go for a management. So first is design, second is implementation, and third is management. So if this practice is being followed, then yeah, it is going to be a ultimate advantage. And if also during the development process you notice that something is wrong with some resource, then again you have go back to this stage and change the documentation, change it first, and again do the feedback validation, then again go for the next updated development. So yeah, so any questions till this slide? So Priya, if you can see on the chat, if no, then I'll just move ahead.
No, not really, but I am happy to see responses on the questions which you are asking. So that's a great thing. But no questions. But explicitly, if anybody has it, please unmute yourself and just start talking or just start asking your question. That's absolutely fine.
Yep, thank you. Okay, so so this is what just I talked about: design patterns, mock and get the user feedback, make necessary changes, and start coding to the spec, and don't debut it. So what are the explicitly benefits that we are achieving from this spec driven development? So with the documentation, first of all, this parallelize the development process. So what it means is basically, with the documentation in hands, both the server and client can develop simultaneously. So if we are working on the API specification and we give the mocking service to the public URL, the customer can also will start testing the endpoint, and we'll also both the client and server can work develop their kind of implementation simultaneously. If client is also wants to do some development on the API part, so yeah, so it's kind of a parallel development process from both the sides, and also making the API can improve this benefit. Okay, so the next one is improves understanding of the whole. So when we are writing the documentation, you will face edge cases, find inconsistencies, and also notice some design problems. So this will make the development process a lot easier and decrease the amount of rework. So so again and again we'll because before going for the implementation part, we are going to fix the part of API specification first and finalize it very nicely. Third is guide development. Again, the same point, using the documentation as a base for spec driven development ensures that API does exactly what it promises, right? And by delivering a great test coverage and decreases amount of bugs and vulnerabilities what we face in the later phase of lifecycle. So yeah, this was all about spec driven development. And the next one was the think about the API term. So here I would like to take a pause and again ask what comes in your mind when this question arises. Like what you think in your real life as a when you start building any API, like what things comes in your mind before going for like implementation or API specification? What do you think basically?
So this is not a question just for an architect, but as a developer also. Like, is there something which comes in your mind when people say the word API, and when we
Yeah,
are
suppose you want to build you want to design an API. So what do you think personally? Like do you have your requirements or prerequisites, URI parameter, query parameter, whatever it is? Just if anyone would like
The first and foremost question is, what is the purpose of this API? and what is
Okay.
the
Yeah.
requirement of this? What are they trying to fulfill? And if so, how the consumer can call the API that is something exposed at Newland or anywhere. So what is the real purpose of the API? What are they trying to achieve here? And if so, if the consumer can call the API, do they have the ability to call? And if so, how are they going to call us? I mean, there are various attributes, right? Like as you said, they can call us via like query params, headers, like URI params, there are so on and so forth. So these are the basic comes to my mind suddenly.
Yeah. Who was that?
This is Vinny.
Okay, so Vineet, I think yeah, you were absolutely correct, but there are many more stuff to be taken care upon. But yeah, these are the very basics, and that we should take care before going for any API. Okay, so so first one is think of long term. So when we say long term, so API should be designed for long term use. It is easier if you understand your targeted API consumer. So the favorite reason to think about long term is that you are probably really bad at long term design. So you may think that you are good at design, but let me ask you this. Okay, so have you ever looked at your code a year later or 2 years later and said like, this is the most amazing thing I have implemented, I wouldn't have changed anything, right? No. So everything needs a change. So always build your API with the future in mind. Things can change quickly, so but your API needs to adapt quicker. And also think that you will have millions of users to serve. Okay. um, to achieve this basically you need to judge everything on two aspects of API. One is sustainability, how your API is going to sustain, and one is scalability, how fast your scale. Okay, on the number of users, if you're going to increase or by any means. So it also means like building a API for beyond today. So that's the challenge that we have to run into. So today we say this is the API, these are the needs we have, these are the requirements that we have, this is our platform. But that's great, but what's our platform is going to be after 2 years, after 4 years, or after 5 years? So that is also we need to think before our API, before we implementing our API or designing our API. So that's the whole motto of think of long term. And the next point is versioning is not a solution. That okay, and you can pay a little now. I'll talk about versioning on the later slides. So you can pay a little now or much more later. This is just a quote. You need to think things through. Yes, you have to think things through every aspect of your API. This is also we'll cover next slide. And mindset is everything. Exactly. Okay, so what we have to think, okay, before that. So these are just high level of questions. Think things through. Who is the API for? What type of API are you building? How are you going to maintain your API? How are you going to document your API? How are you going to let users interact with your API? And of course, how are you going to manage authentication, developer security? How are you going to protect against your server attacks? And how are you going to manage your support? So you have to think through every aspect of your API before building it. These aspects may seem like basic questions in common sense, but they got missed quite a bit. Okay. And also a lot of companies, they say like, we are going to build an API, push it out there and that's it, deploy it. I promise you that that's not it. You have to maintain it. So how we are going to maintain, whether we have to do a Swagger or RAML, and also how we should go for authentication or authorization, which authentication, which authorization, which security, and also how we are going to manage the support, whether we have a dedicated support team or a community forum, whatever. So these are all aspects we need to think before for every API. It's just not that we should build and deploy it somewhere. Okay, and again, this is a very kind of a basic knowledge. Who will be using an API that we need to think on, like who are going to be our end consumers. So it can be current consumers, it can be a business partners, it can be other third-party services. What action they need to access to, sitting down and talking to them on a daily to daily basis. How can we involve them in design process? The user should be involved from day one by any means, or like by your design, by your mocking service, and whatever you're doing, by some community forum. Yeah. So any questions till there? So yeah, you can see any question, or I'll cover this versioning part.
Not really.
I think
Sumit.
you can continue, sir.
Yes, you
Okay.
can continue.
Okay, so the versioning part is okay. Sorry, you are speaking something.
Nothing, you can go on.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so versioning a necessary evil, So why we are calling versioning as a necessary evil? Do anyone has some idea around this?
I think it's mainly because of we are updating APIs one by one. Like now we will create one API, and after few times we might need to update few things or might need to add some facilities. So in that time, it'd be better if we do some versioning on the APIs.
Yeah, that is one. There also because necessary evil is why we are saying, because it's kind of necessary also. We have to go for that, and when we go for that, it brings some problems with it. So that's the reason we are calling it as a necessary evil. So what all problems we are facing with versioning? So in short, it's easy to say like we are going for a version, we are going for new version, and it's going to be great, but it has certain drawbacks. So we'll go by one. So first is backward incompatibilities. So what is that? Basically, first and foremost, versioning creates a backward incompatibilities, which means that whenever you are upgrading your API, the apps relying on your previous API are going to break, and sorry, on the new API are going to break. And when they break, you are going to hear all the complaints from them, and you have to manage whether they are going to upgrade for a new API or you have to support for existing one. These are all complaints that you're going to hear, and no matter how many consumers that you are having at the current stage. So definitely it's going to create some backward incompatibilities problem. Also, the second one is multiple services to maintain and the multiple systems to support. So why multiple systems and services? So you may say, no, that's not how it works, but we are going to deprecate this API, the previous one, and we are not going to support it anymore. We are going to release a fresh new API, the upgraded one. But let me tell you, consider you have $1 million customer who says, you know what, I actually we are stuck on old API and we can't upgrade on the new API. Then what you will do? Okay, so in that case, you have to, and you have to be enable both the APIs that you have. You have to provide a multiple support to all your APIs, and multiple systems and multiple services will get impacted on that. Or also they might say like, this one works, why should we go back and spend money to fix something which is not being broken? Okay, so if some consumer is already satisfied with the old API, then why he will spend some money to go for a new API, right? So in that way, you have to support multiple systems, multiple services. And also the basic point, like, it create confusion amongst developer, like whenever any support whenever any complaints that we are hearing, so it might get confused, developers might get confused, like which version we should support, for which consumer is supporting which version, and what is going on. So these are just the disadvantages of the problem that we are facing with versioning. Okay, so if any questions now?
One question is there from Deepak Suman. How do we maintain that smooth transition to ask the consumers to use the latest version of API?
Okay, so we can have a smooth transition if we have first of all, we can publish that in our exchange, like the documentation should be nice, or we can throw a temporary callback URL like, this service is deprecated, you can use a new API. So there are multiple ways to recover that, and enhance, like to enlighten that till all the consumers by documentation or by this callback URL. So yeah, I hope I answer your question, Deepak.
Yep, that makes sense.
Yeah, anybody in the group who would like to answer this, or maybe have they faced such issues and what they have done in such a situation?
Hi, this is Vinny. I would like to ask one question on this regard.
Yes.
Maybe I understood wrong. So by the term versioning, you mean that updation of an API, right? For instance, there is an API running, and we are doing any changes, that itself is an version upgrade. Is that what this versioning means, or?
Yeah, suppose you have created a API, or implemented an API and deployed somewhere, but you want to upgrade an API and you are creating totally new version of that. So you will have you will be having two APIs running, right? So you might have seen in the
Okay,
URI like
so
V1 and V1.0, V1.1 in the design center.
Okay, okay, that's what I was about to ask, because
Yeah.
this V1 and V1.1 or 1.2, whatsoever is internal to Mule, right? How should or why should a consumer calling URL be affected with that? Because consumer will be calling some
No, this V1, V1.0 is not internal to
inside Mule, right?
MuleSoft.
Does that, sorry?
Okay. Okay. What I'm saying is this V1.0, V1.1 is not internal to MuleSoft. This is something we are publishing whenever you design any API. So you have to give the versioning, and when we will publish that, it will publish in that direction in the URI. The URL will not get affected. So if you're going to publish two versions with 1.0 and 1.1, then two APIs you can deploy directly in the runtime manager, and both the APIs can like behave in a different way. So different consumers can
Okay.
call either the V1.0 or V.1. There's the reason we are saying multiple services to maintain and multiple systems to support as well.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, Rahul, I think you have mentioned
Sumit,
a fair point that people generally confuse the version and the asset version systems. Yeah, sorry.
yeah, sorry to interrupt. Yeah, Sumit, I just got confused there. Like as you mentioned, if we are doing some upgradation, how it will be deploying in a two different API? I didn't get it clear.
Okay, so once you design your API in Design Center, so first you will publish that, right? So when you publish that, you will have a new version of that, and with that, you can deploy that API in by two versions, no? With
Okay, that
XML.
means whenever we deploy something that will be in a new version, however, the already existing system might be running in a lower version. That's what you mean to say.
Exactly, because the URL is going to be different. Like it will be having a V1 and other one will be having a V2. Like the total URL is
Uh,
going to be different.
Yeah, someone was referring, right? I mean, someone was referring like asset version and this version. That's what I was about to ask as well. Maybe I messed up with the question. So even for a small change, like we add an extra method or extra attributes in the API and we deploy, that creates an extra asset version. That doesn't affect the end customer, right?
No,
So
that doesn't affect it. This is something for API versioning, not for the asset versioning. So
got it.
when you
That
want to, yeah, okay,
yeah,
yep,
that's what I was because why should an affect asset
yeah.
version affect the consumer?
No, that's not the case. If you, yeah, that was the asset version. Okay, if no more further questions, I think I'm done with my part, and the later part of this agenda will be covered by Supriya. So yeah, so let me just stop sharing my screen and I'll hand over to Supriya. Thanks all of you.
Thanks,
Uh,
Sumit. That was nice.
yes, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Sumit. So, Sumit, you can have a look in the chat window. Okay, if there are certain questions on this topic, you can answer that.
Sure. Yeah.
So, let me know if you are able to see my screen.
Yes, we can see.
So, I think so far Sumit has covered about talking, about the APM. Let me talk about some of the points he has covered in the RAML. Let me talk about now RAML inheritance. Okay. Basically, here I'm going to talk about the resource type and a traits. These are the terms which you use in a day-to-day language. Like when you're dealing with the APIs, definitely this is your first step, that you go into the design center and then you define libraries, resource types, traits, annotations, data types. These all things you take into the consideration while writing any API. Okay, while writing any API in the design center. So resource type, let's talk about a resource type. Okay, it's basically a template that is used to define the description, methods, parameters that can be used in the multiple resources. Okay, and this will avoid to write the duplicate code and a repeating code. Okay, and similarly, the traits is the function and used to define a common attributes for HTTP method, wherein we can include the security mechanism, we can use the filtrations, the pagination. Okay, these all things we can include as part of a traits. Now let's see how do we refer it into the RAML. So this is a resource type. Now, for example, if you can see this is a collection. Okay, so collection is a resource type which we are planning to create. In this, we'll write the uses, description. Inside that, we are added the get method, the post method, and also inside the post method, we are adding the response also, that how should it look like. Now, whole of the resource type which we are creating in the collection, if we try to use the same resource type in a different resource, we don't have to write this from these uses to this example, the whole of the code. You can avoid to write it again. Okay, you can simply use it using a keyword called type. I'll tell you how. Can you see this? Now this is my resources. In my particular RAML, I'm defining something and I have two resources. So my URL is going to be different /songs /artist. In my /song collection, just because I have defined the resource type, which was collection, I can avoid the repetition of the code which you see here. So if you can see, inside the type I've called the collection, and then I'm starting with example, which is altogether a different thing. But here if you see in the collection, post, get, differently I don't have to call. If you go here, if I create this RAML, automatically it's going to create two methods for one resource, songs. One will be post and another will be a get, when you actually try to create the flows out of RAML. Okay. Similarly, in artist, if we want to save that efforts, that we don't have to define it again and again, if you call a collection using a keyword type, in that case, you can avoid writing the get post method and whatever you mentioned as part of a resource type. That particular thing you can avoid. And on top of that, like all this resource type, I earlier mentioned that this you can add as a part of a libraries. Libraries can have annotations, resource type, data type, and also the traits. Okay. Talking about the traits. Now here I wanted to, define a response message. Okay. That this is how my response message should look. 200, the body, and the example should be data created, or maybe okay, or data accepted, something like that. So this response message I have created. Now there's only a way that I want to use these traits, that I will use using a is. Now if you see this particular example, I'm using this as inside the method also and inside the resource directly. Okay. So one I'm using here, if you see in the albums, I'm using this is response message. So this is a way we can use a traits. Okay. Similarly, as part of a traits, you can definitely such a response messages if you have some request structure to be defined, or some response structure, or also the exception handling messages, wherein 400 you want to mention, 500 you want to mention as part of an API. That also you can add as a part of error response message, and then you can refer it using the keyword is. Let's talk about mocking, but before moving to mocking, is anybody has any questions? Sanjana, Sumit, can you just check the chat?
Supriya, so far no questions. I can see Anjali Reddy is joined, and she's saying my screen turns into black and even order. So I just asked her to join again. So
Okay,
that's fine.
That's great. That's good. Okay, so let's talk about the mocking. Okay, now most of y'all, like I'll just talk about Design Center because we have been practicing here. So here, there in the right side, there's always a button, try it. Okay, we mention all our points as part of a RAML, and what is the next step is that we have to store that RAML and we have to go in the code and create flows out of it. Before doing that, there is one step which is extremely useful and you can go for it. That if you write your RAML, if you want to test it on a Design Center itself, okay, or your consumer who's going to use this API, or maybe send the data to this API, or call this API to get some data. If that consumer is also expecting a response from you, that how have you designed the RAML, because designing the API is the base of the complete API. Sorry for this. Yeah. So designing the API, RAML is the base for that. So here in the right side, there's a button which is try it. Okay. If you click that, there are two icons. One is this and another is this, which looks like a settings. Okay. Now this is something I'll call it as a mocking. If you do a try it, you can definitely call your own resources and check if they are giving the response properly or not. So let's talk about a public link. Now, yeah, to simulate a call to an API, there are two ways. One is an internal URL and another is a public URL. So internal URL is this, wherein you can see that this is how you have added the, the URL is there, and you can click on the try it, add one resources, and just check if I'm getting the expected response or not. This is how you can use the internal URL. Whereas a public URL, now you imagine you creating the RAML, adding it into the code, you give it to the consumers later, and then they come up with the problems that, in this schema, we want to add this, or probably we want to add some more exception responses or some more successful responses. What do we do at that time? Okay, we'll have to change all of the code. In that case, what we can do is, this is the public link which gets, after clicking this, you'll get the link. You can copy this link, give it to the consumers, they can try it out. They can try the exact resources with the proper security mechanism. So by this, we can avoid the repetition of the work, and back and forth, there would not be a discussion. There will be, it will be a smooth processing of how API can be developed. Now next is resources and a naming convention. Absolutely, in each organization, there are some sets of rules or the validation things or the naming convention things. Everybody has their own list, but just as a part of this meetup, I've tried to include something. Use of a parameters we're going to talk about, wherein I'll talk about the URI parameter and the query parameter. And in that case, also we'll see that how effectively we can give the naming convention. So if you can see, there's one example I have bring in front of you, so which is bad. So can you see this file -id, and then there is a file ID. So this is the best use of using a URI parameters. Instead of this, you can have such a elements as part of a designing in RAML. Further, you are going to use these parameters in the variable. Probably you can send it to the different API. So this is extremely important in the start of the designing, that how you are following the naming conventions. Okay. As I mentioned, the query parameter and URI parameter, most of you all should must be knowing the difference between this. But a URI parameter is when you want to find the specific record. For example, in a Salesforce, my record is created about my personal information. So you can search it using the email ID, which is probably unique. So email ID is equal to supriya@gmail.com, something like that. Having said that, like if you put such a URI parameter in the URL, that will give you the exact information of the record. Whereas query parameter, it basically gets uses for the filtration purpose. For example, you want to figure out that particular sheet has how many people who are from maybe whose state is Maharashtra, or whose state is Kerala, or whose country is India or US, something like that. So question mark after the URL, question mark country is equal to US, and then we'll figure out that how many people are in our list or in the records who are from US. For such a things, you can go for the query parameter. And as you know, for URI parameter, curly braces, and for query parameter, you add a question mark in the URL to fetch any particular records. We are going to move on to the HTTP codes, but before that, any other information is required, or any question, doubt?
I think Supriya will.
Yeah, Supriya, I just have one question here. Just trying to understand the difference between this API notebook and this mocking facility of this API in this design center as well. So is there any difference between both of them?
So tell me one thing, Deepak, before this, is the API notebook option is available in the design center?
Yes. I'm not sure on that, but because the only thing which I was just worrying about is that when I look at the documentation for the API notebook, what I see is that it is just a live. You will be calling your REST API as in real time actually. So that means the data which actually goes through from API client to the real-time API, which is actually running on the background, the real-time API on the back of your main RAML. So, but in the mocking URL, if you try to use the mocking service for that API, it is not kind of real time. I'm sure.
No. So what I'll just like to pick this up. So basically, API Notebook is kind of a different concept on that ground. So in API Notebook, it's a web-based tool, and we have to design our API in that way. We have to set our examples, requests URL. All we have to do there. consumers should have a facility to test the API, entire API, with having all these details there in API notebook, which we'll publish. So they don't need the Anypoint platform access for that. And this design center one is just a mocking service. They are just going to have a URL. That's it. They won't be able to see the request, response, schema, examples kind of. They will just have the URL, and from that URL they'll just try to hit. But in API notebook, they can view as a notebook what is API all about, what are these examples, request, schema, everything. So this is something this is a new concept that we have Anypoint platform side. So this is a major difference between that.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so as he explained correctly, I think me being a consumer, if some URL is given to me or some authentication is given to me, what do I see is just the response. I do not have a view to that, how they have actually added everything. I'll be only able to get to know that when I start testing. I start testing the mock API, for which they have given the URL, right? And API notebook, as he explained, you'll have a view to check that how exactly you have exposed that API as part of, like in that it includes the schemas and the API specifications and everything. So I think that is the difference. But yeah, definitely, Deepak, it's a good question. And API notebook is something people are not practicing it too much. But yes, as it's new, I will try to explore it as much as possible. Okay, anybody, any other question?
Supriya, Ajit here. The question related to the naming convention which you specified in the previous slide. So I just noted one thing. Can you just go back to the previous slide, please?
Yeah.
So here in the bad section, you have specified file -id, and if you come into the good one, file ID. That's totally. But what make me confused, like the URI endpoint get contents. So in bad section, the get contents using a underscore, and the good section get contents using a hyphen. So which one is preferable, like a hyphen or underscore?
So basically, I would like to pick that question. Supriya, is that fine for you?
Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely, so the API resource names should not have any special character. It should be pure non-form. So if you see on that, the API resource of file ID in the bad section, we have a hyphen there. So whether the hyphen or the underscore both are not acceptable there. But if you come down on the attribute section in the get, we have display name. So that can be either we can use hyphen or we can go for underscore as well. So that is fine.
Sumit, that was not the question actually. Like in display name as well, it's a RAML spec, right? The display name should be in the form which you specified in the bad section. That's what my understanding. I'm not sure if I'm wrong. The display underscore name, it's acceptable in RAML?
No, that is acceptable. But the only thing that we are going to that we are trying to focus here is on the file -id
Okay.
here. Okay.
Okay.
On
Cool.
I
Yeah,
think we should have covered
in
on
that
this
case,
yellow
okay,
mark.
fine.
Yellow mark we should have done. Okay. Rest of the part is fine. Okay.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the next part is HTTP codes. Like, I'm not sure, most of us get a frequent 4xx and a 5xx errors, okay, which is a client and a server related error. And definitely in the successful case, it is 2xx. But I just would like to tell you about the informational HTTP code, which is, honestly speaking, I don't get it usually, but this speaks about the information, okay? So 100, if the code is 100, that is continue. If there is a code which is 102, that is a processor. That if there is a 101, there is a switching protocol. These are the code, these are the messages which I told you, but these are the codes. In our day-to-day life, what integration we are dealing with, generally we don't come across such a codes, but just for the information purpose, I'm just telling you. Coming back to the 2xx codes, meaning 2xx, which is 200, usually when the API is all okay, and for the get status and everything, we use this code wherein it just suggests us that your API is up and running. So that gives us a 200 okay. Now there is 201 which is created, 202 which is accepted, and then there are so many in 2xx. Coming back to 3xx, this is a redirect HTTP codes. Okay. So one or two, I'll just tell you. We can take an example of 300. Now 300 code describes about the multiple choices if you in case receive this in the response, that meaning the message comes as a multiple choices, whereas if you receive a 304, that means it is say talking about the not modified thing. So again, there's hardly a chance that we'll get this type of codes back from any of the API, because we tend to the focus is more on the success, client and server errors. Like there is now, let's talk about the client errors. Now this is too many, as from the client, if the API or if the things are not okay, we may get a bad request, which is 400, 405, which is method not allowed. The method expose there is a post and we are trying to do a get or put, then and in the case we'll get the method not allowed. Then 401, like unauthorized, right? If the username password which is shared by the target, we are using some different only, like we are making some mistake, in case of unauthorized we'll get. Then there is 404 not found. We are trying to do something which is absolutely not a part of an API. In that case, we'll get a 404. On the same note, let's talk about the 5xx, which is a server error. Now, the most common is a 500 internal server error that we get whenever the server is like occupied, too much busy, or maybe down for some time. We tend to get such errors. One of them is internal server error. Now, another is a gateway timeout, like, the request processing, whatever we are triggered, it's taking too much of time. So in that case, we'll get a 504, which is a gateway timeout. 503 we can will be getting when the particular service is unavailable. The API is up and running, maybe there is no server error, the server is not down, no timeout at all, but that particular service is unavailable. In that case, we'll get a 503. So this HTTP codes, definitely you will figure it out on a Google, that more descriptive way it has given. But this is the most common things, most common questions today also. If we try to take a requirements of a client, we tend to mix it with just one error code, or tend to mix it with one success code, which is only 200. But definitely, like honestly speaking about HTTP codes, this is the best way to use it, to try and understand each and every code and try and having a separate message for each and every code. That definitely helps in the best practices. Now, HTTP verbs on the same ground, we'll talk get, put, patch, post, delete. I mean, we all are aware about this. Two things I've not mentioned, which is the option and the head. That's also the HTTP verbs. But yeah, as you know, get is to get the data, like at that time. So here we have to be really cautious that what method we are using as part of a RAML. You know that there is getting, the request is getting, the request is coming to the API. We pick up some ID from the request. Okay, we go to the Salesforce, or we go to the target system. We get the data about that ID, and then we send it back to the API. What would be the right use in this case is, instead of post or any other method, we shall be using a get. In get also, we can mention that which URI parameter, which query parameter we can pass it in the URL, and we can absolutely get the information. This is like, having said that, this is easy to read. The API, you can easily read that this many methods are allowed, this many methods are added as part of a RAML. And like speaking to the clients, getting the proper requirements, you exactly understand that what is the best method which fits in this a transaction. So as I mentioned, get is about to get the data. Put is, that you want to update some data. Patch is, you're aware that you want to specifically patch some information. So in this case, we can go for a patch. Post is when you want to post the entire information, you want to keep on creating the records, you can use a post. And delete is something wherein you can mention the parameters and delete the set of data probably, or set of the records, depending on the condition what is used in the delete. Having said that, like we have a next topic, but before that, you guys have any questions about what I explained about the RAML best practices?
I don't see any question in the chat window, but guys, if you have any questions, please speak out.
Okay, so thank you guys. I think it was really patient with all of you all. I think API and RAML. So we have tried to cover it in the high level. And on top of this, if you have any questions, you can connect with us on any other social site, or maybe you can drop us email with respect to any of particular queries you have. We can definitely get in touch and try to provide you the technical help. And thank you, I think, and I'll hand it over to Sanjana next to talk about the power of data weave.
Supriya, one small doubt. How's put different from patch? I mean, both the methods do the same similar operation, right? Update.
Yes. So, Suman, I'll try to answer this, and definitely from the other folks, if they have better answer, you can pitch in and speak about it. So, what is my observation is that there is suppose if particular record is there and we want to update it. Okay. Now, I have for that you need to know what is the unique ID of that record. Okay. Whereas in post you don't need to know that. But in update, you know that this particular record is already present. You know that unique ID, that this is the email ID, and then it will completely get the information. Will get insert there. So that is called as if you have heard about the term upsert. Okay, and now there is a patch wherein you want to particularly update some information and not the entire record. For example, entire record consists of the personal details, education details, what do we say, work profile, and etc. But patch will be used when you want to particularly update some, what do we say, some patch, some information of that record. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. So basically for the full updates and patches for the partial updates. Yeah, as Rajit has also mentioned.
Okay. Thank you, Supriya. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think I'll hand it over to Sanjana now. She'll be speaking about the power of data weave.
Thanks, Supriya. Thanks, Sumit, for the wonderful session. So let me share my screen and let me know once it is visible to you guys. So let's move on to next, yet another interesting topic, which is power of data weave. So first, I think I would like to spend a minute or so in getting views from you guys. Like, what do you think data weave is from a MuleSoft perspective? You guys have any input? I think you can unmute yourself and let me know.
So one thing, like guys, as you know, when we were using Mule 3, we had a transform message concept. Okay, and now we have a data weave. So we want to hear your experience with data weave, like what all, for example, David has just mentioned it is for code and transformations. Okay, what else? Like what, when you see the term data weave, you only the transformation comes in your mind, or are there some any other things also? Would like to know about this from you.
Yeah, I think someone was speaking.
Hi, this is Vinay. My understanding, data weave is nothing but an expression language to access the data which comes out of MuleSoft. And apart from that, it helps in transforming the business logics and convert the format to whatever it is. So it gets the data from the consumer and converts it into the form of what the target requires. Expect the response and give it back in the way or method how we. So
Yeah,
that's a very high level.
Yeah, yes, you're correct. But that is where our most of the I would say knowledge about data weave lies. But I would like to say that data weave is much more than that. So definitely you're correct that it is an expression language that we use in MuleSoft for transformation. But unlike Mule 3, it is not only limited to data transformations. So we have many other features which have been provided in Data Weave 2.0, which we are going to see in couple of our next slides. So for example, you can create modules or Lambda functions in the data weaves. You can even have flow controls. So earlier it was possible to control these flows via components only, right? But now we also have the feature to have scope operations as well as flow controls using this data weave script, which is a language. It also provides a feasibility of streaming in terms of when you want to process large amount of data and you don't want to avoid memory overloading errors and everything. And again, a very important feature is the data sense or the preview mapping, which kind of eases us our manual mapping approach and also helps us avoid any errors which come up in future, which may have overlooked. So like these are some of the overview, and in the next couple of slides we will be understanding that how it is not only limited to consuming a data and transforming it into one format and setting. So let's continue. So the various formats have been there are a lot of different formats being Java, JSON, Excel format, CSV format, form data format when you want to access an HTTP form data, so on and so forth. So these are not only limited to reading, correct? So you cannot, it is not that you just can read these data, but you can also write your output data using any of these formats. So that is also one of a very important factor or very important feature that the data weave provides in terms of expression as an expression language, that you can not only have them as an input, but you can also transform them as a part of your own output. So let's come to our very first function, which is a read function. Now over here in this slide, I have given a comparison of how how easy it makes our work when we are using a data weave language. So there is a simple read URL operation which we can use to read an Excel file over here. So as you can see, this is the read URL function, which is an out-of-box function provided by data weave, where we can provide our class path or the directory as a first URL parameter and the format which we want to read into as the second parameter, which we just saw in our previous slide. So you can see just with 4 lines of code, I am able to read an Excel file as well as I am able to transform or read a particular column from that Excel file. Now, when the same is compared while writing some native like a Java-based code, so you can see over here, right, there are so much lines of coding that I have to do. I have to first get an input stream, then I have to move it to my sheet, then I have to add or check what cell type I am reading it, because it can a different function. Of course, in Java, you can have different libraries for this purpose, but again, that is something you have to do. It is not provided out of box like in this case. So that is a very important feature, this read URL function, which easily helps us to read data in multiple formats like we just saw in this slide, and do our necessary transformations. So let's move to the next section, which is the logging one. So this is not very commonly used function, I would say, but still it is a very helpful function, which many of us are not aware of, which is a log function in the data weave. So this is very helpful when you want to do certain debugging scripts, right? In case when you have very complex data weaves having hundreds of lines of data weave code, and you're not able to get like at what point the error is happening. Is it because it is not giving a proper output or something like that? That is why you're not able to process the data. So this log function is very much helpful in those cases when you want to debug your data weave scripts. So as you can see in this example, there is already an inbuilt function log for which you don't really have to import anything. It is present in the core, in one of the core functions or in the core module. So the parameter that it expects is the string that you want to input, and also another parameter which I have not mentioned over here, I would say, is the log level that you can say. So the first parameter that you can enter over here is, let's say, warning as your logging info level logging, and then you can give the string that you want to log. So these two parameters you can data weave output and see where it is failing or as per your requirement. So any questions, or can we move ahead? Sumit, Supriya, do we have any questions?
Yeah, Sanjana, I think there is a question from Vineet. Yeah, Vineet, go on.
How exactly this log function is different from the logger? Both same? Just
okay, so it essentially will log your data in the console, but when it comes to difference, right? So when you are using a logging component, when you will use a logging component, when you have done with your transformation and you want to log it, correct? But this DataWeave log function, you can use within DataWeave itself. So let's say if you have put some if-else statement in your DataWeave, correct? But for some reason, you can see that it is not working properly. It is always going to your default case, which should not be the correct case. So you want to maybe debug and check what input, what output you are getting, because of which it is failing. So that you cannot do with component, right? That you cannot do using a logger component.
This is basically the things inside the transformation itself, rather waiting until that gets done.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So moving on to the next feature, control and scope operations. So just like logging, we can also control flow operations using DataWeave code itself. So when we talk about control operations, what are they? So they are the, like I just said, if-else statements or the do scope. So over here, you can see is an example of an if-else statement, which is controlling our processing on the basis of certain statement, right? So in this example, what we are trying to do is we are checking if the number is even or if a number is odd. So it is just a simple DataWeave expression that we are giving an input integer x, we are checking the modulus operator of that, and if it is 0, we are printing that x is an even number, else it is an odd number. So this was just a simple example, but in real life, we use it for much more complex implementations. But yeah, this is a way where you can control your flow operations in DataWeave. Now how are you, if you can say it is analogous to your conditions, like I would not say completely analogous to choice conditions, because in that your first successful will run, it will not go to the else part. So this is like a flow control where you want to do anything. Regarding the do scope, it is more of a declaration. If you want to declare certain piece of variables or code before you start your DataWeave, so you can use the do scope to do that. So like I said, it is just not limited to transformations. You can do much more coding using this DataWeave scripts. We come to the lookup operations. So it will, what does this lookup operation do? So it allows you to execute a flow from the DataWeave, okay, and you can provide the input that you want the flow to have. So this is analogous to the flow reference component that we use in the MuleSoft, but the only difference is that the lookup does not allow us to invoke the subflows. Okay, so you can see that this is an example of the lookup invocation. So the lookup operation expects two parameters. First is the name of the flow that you want to invoke, and the second is the payload that you are passing to that flow. So if so the result or the return, whatever this flow to returns, will be your return from this particular script. So if we combine these two things, right, the flow control and the lookup operations, so you can see how it can control. So for example, if my certain criteria falls, I need to call this lookup flow reference, else I need to call another flow reference. So this thing you can handle with DataWeave, which is, I would say, a very, very, very powerful or very important kind of thing. So this is how you can use lookup functions. You can also provide a timeout, that if this flow does not give any response within certain timeout, so it will throw an DataWeave script error. So Sumit and Supriya, you guys can, I'm not in the chat, so if there is any question, you guys can stop me and let me know.
Not really. I think last question we had was about logging, and we are good so far. But I request people to put your questions in the chat window if you have any.
So the next is creating Lambda functions. Now this is a very important aspect because generally, as we all must have come across, that our transformations are not that simple one-to-one transformations. Generally, in some cases, it becomes a quite complex transformations wherein we need to check multiple things, repeated things also. So as a good practice, what we can do is the repeated part of code that we need to check, we can create them in a separate function, and which we can invoke from our DataWeave again and again as and when required. Okay. So rather than writing this if-else piece of code every time in a field, we can just create a function which does that processing, and we can invoke it time and again wherever required. This is a very important function. So this in this below snippet, what you can do, what you can see is I've created a function known as check validity, and this will check the validity date of that input, like if it is greater than today's time, or if it is less than today's time. So let's say this date is of 27/1/21, which I had executed earlier. So the validity is false because it is not valid since it is of month January and not today's month. So the validity of that user is false. So this was just one example of how we can create functions. So if you see, we can create it via two approach. First is using the fun, which is a function keyword. So we can give this function name and we can pass it as a parameter. So whenever you are invoking this function, the parameter that you pass will become its argument. So over here, validity which I am passing will become my input to this function. And if you can see, that is just again an if else statement which I am doing to check if the date which we have received, is it greater than the now, which is the current date. If it is greater, then that means it is valid, or else it is not valid. So this is just a simple function which I've created to demonstrate this. But yeah, so one way of creating Lambda functions is using fun keyword. The other way is using the variable. So the same code snippet, but the only difference, if you see, if you can compare it, when you are using a func keyword, you provide the function name as well as its argument. But when you are creating a variable, you need to give a variable name, and this becomes your argument for your function. So this validity is transformed into obj, and wherever obj is being accessed, it is accessed with this variable. So this is also a very important data weave functions, which helps us to create Lambda function using variable as well as using the fun keyword.
One moment before moving forward. There's Ajit's question: how to specify timeout in DataWeave?
Yeah, that was clear now, Priya. I got an answer from Ranjit Vishwakarma. Yeah, I think that makes it clear.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Surya. Yeah, so this is for the Lambda function creating a fun keyboard and the variable keyboard. So next we come to a very popular function, which is a map iterator, and it is generally used to iterate over array or the list of values and do our transformation. So this is the input. As you can see, this input is an input of array of first name and last name. So I have applied a map operator and given a value and index. So this is exactly what I was talking about Lambda function, right? So this is where I am creating my Lambda function over here. Right? So this is my Lambda function which I am creating. I am giving the value and index. So wherever I access value, it means that I am trying to access this value part. So when I see value dot first name, it corresponds to the first name, and when I say value dot last name, it corresponds to the last name. Right? So this is also a very I would say very popular function which we use in DataWeave, and the output of the map function is going to be again an map, which is a list of your transformed objects. So there is not only using value and index that you can access. So in map operator, if you don't provide these keywords, you can use the dollar to access the values of the map data. So let's say if you, rather than value, you can do a dollar dot first name to access the first name and dollar dot last name to access the last name. So this is how you can use the map operator. So the next is the map object. So the difference, so both of these are iterators, map and map object. The difference is that the map works on the list or array of input, and map object works on the list on key value pairs. So as you can see that this is a key value pair object, and we are using it to iterate over and provide the data. So we are just swapping the value versus. So the input is A colon B, C colon D, and we are giving as B colon A, D colon C. So this is a very simple example of the map operator. So again over here, if you are not providing these values, so you can use dollar to access the value. You can use double dollar to access your key, and $1 to access your indexes. So rather than key, if you want, you can put value colon like that. So either of way you choose. But this becomes very important or handy when you're having nested iterations, like a map object inside a map object inside a map object. So this comes very handy when you want to really call those terms. So next is the filter operations. Now this filter operation, what it does is, again, it works on a list or an array of input, and it filters the data on the basis of the logic or the function given. So in this particular example, you can see we have an array of numbers, and what we are trying to do is we are trying to again just filter the even numbers from this list. So the filter and function is lambda function is defined as value and index. We are doing value mod 2, that means the values of the array mod 2, and if it is true, it will pick only those. So basically your filter function, it is very important to understand that this filter function should always return a Boolean operation. Okay, it should always return either true or false. Only then this filter operation will be able to pick or filter those values that you want. So if you give it something like just a constant string in this, so it will throw an error, because what it is expecting that this evaluation of your logic should be a Boolean expression, either true or false. So let's move to the other. So get set from objects. So this is also a very good function, I would say. So in cases, what we do is generally, let's say if you want to pick a value, right? If you want to iterate through the objects and pick only keys, only the key, let's say true and 1. So what we generally do is we apply a map object on this, and then we pick only the keys. But there is a very easier way to do that, which is using the key set operator or a key set function. This key set function will directly give you a list of all the keys in your object. Similar to that, there is a value set function. If you want to just obtain the value of a particular object, let's say in this case true and 1, sorry, in this case it was value 1 and value 2, which are the keys. So it will return value 1 and value 2. In this case, if you just want to iterate or have the keys of a particular object, you can use a value set operator, which will give you the array of values. So if you can see, it is true and 1 and value 1 and a value 2.
Sanjana, just adding one point. So for using this key set and value set, first we need to import that package, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it is inside the objects module. So you can import this module and then use it as your function. And essentially, as the name suggests, you can use it only on objects, because only your objects are going to have key value pairs. Your array will not have a key value. So let's move ahead to the reduce function. So this reduce function kind of works like an accumulator. Okay. So and what does your reduce function do? So it expects an array or a list of values, and it applies your accumulator function on each of the elements of those arrays. Okay, and gives you the output. So in this example, in the DataWeave script that you see, right? So what we have done is we have created two keys, a total sum and an even sum. Now in total sum, we are adding all the digits in this integer. So if you can see, that is payload, we are applying a reduce operator, and this is our accumulator function. Okay. In this, the $, that you can see is my accumulator. That means what it has accumulated. So the initial value of your accumulator is always going to be 0. And your $, is again your current value. So if you go to first iteration of this reduce function, so initially it is 0, it will add the first value, which is 1. Now this accumulator value has changed to 1. Now for the second iteration, the accumulator is 1, the next value is 2. So now the 1 plus 2, 3, so the accumulator value has changed to 3. So by this, it gives us a total sum of all the arrays, and it gives us number. In the second, we are trying to just add the numbers, only the numbers which are even. So as you can see on the payload, first we have applied the filter to check if it is even. And then on that even list, we are doing a reduce operator. So first it will pick using a filter operator. We are picking only those numbers which are even, and then we are adding those numbers. Any question on this, or we can go ahead?
Sanjana.
Okay, next is a flatten operator. So in this flatten operator, we can combine sub-arrays into an array. But the important thing to note over here is it will do only first level of concatenation. So as you can see in this example, there are multiple array 1, 2, 3, 4. And we are combining this combining this into an array of arrays, array 1, array 2, array 3, array 4. And now we are applying a flatten on this. So as you can see, the output is just one single array which is having all these individual elements. Now, as I said, it will do only first level of concatenation. So this is my sub array, right? 9 and 10. So this is printed as it is, because it is only going to do the first level of concatenation. And of course, it is going to omit any empty sub-array. So this is also a very important function when we have multiple arrays which we want to combine, like the input from multiple systems we are receiving, and we want to combine it into a single operation. So we can use this as a flatten. Next is the pluck operator. Now this pluck operator iterates over the object and returns an array of key values. So again, the input of this pluck operator is going to be an object. Now what it does, it iterates over your object and basically converts your object into an array. So like if you have a use case where you want to transform your object into an array format, you want to browse through it, or you want to iterate through that and you want to convert it into an array, so you can use this pluck operator. In this example, what we have done is, as you can see, this is a roll number. So again, pluck operator, first thing is requires three things: value, index, and key. Again, it can be a dollar, a double dollar, and triple dollar index. Okay, so if you don't want to really use these keywords, you can use instead of that these things. Number is index plus 1. So my first index is always going to be 0, hence it is index plus 1. So my first object will return as my roll number 1 and the name. Now the second is the second in which I am going to pick the value. The name is the key and the division is the value. So as you can see, this is Jim belongs to division D, Michael belongs to division A, Kevin belongs to division D. So what I am doing is I am creating a different object for each of these and I am assigning a roll number to them. So if you can see, my output is roll number 1, name is Jim, division is D, roll number 2, name is Michael, division is A. So this I could achieve using a pluck operator, where I am iterating through a map object, but I am giving an output as an array. So next, I think we can move to keys of. So again, this is a similar operator which will give us an output, which will again work on the object part. So it will give an output of the keys of the list of keys which are present in the object. So keys of operator, if you can see, we have applied the keys of function and we are giving it the payload object. So our output is that it is an object inside key of, it is giving an array of all the keys. So this is analogous to the key set that we saw earlier, that it is going to give us a value of the key of the array of keys of those objects. And one thing is, it can be used in Mule 4.3 onwards. Important thing to note. So similar to that, we have again a values of, which is analogous to value set operator, which will give us an array of the values of our input. So if you can see, it is true and 1 and the output is true and 1, and it is inside an object because we have given these parentheses to it. So both key and value of can be used in 4.3 and above new versions. Any questions? Okay.
No, Sanjay.
So let's move on with the next, which is a first with. So the three functions that we are seeing is for Mule 3.0 and above. So the first with, now this is very important. So I would like to know from you guys, if my requirement is I have been given an input of array and I want to iterate it and just pick the first occurrence of a particular name, right? So in this, you can see that my input is an array of objects and the name Marino is repeated, but the last name is different. So my requirement is I want to pick the first occurrence of this Marino. So do you guys have any opinion or options of how we can do it? I would like to hear from you guys, if you guys have any suggestion.
Can you just repeat that question?
Yeah, sure. So you can see the input over here, right? So this is an array or a list of objects. The object has two parameters, the name and the last name. So
Okay.
my requirement, as you can see this, but the name is being repeated, but the last name is different. But I want to pick only the first occurrence of this name Marino.
Mm-hmm.
That means I only want to pick this object.
Okay, I think for that we can use filter as well.
Correct. So for that we can use filter as well. But what filter will do is it will pick all the objects with the name as Marino, correct? And then
Yes.
from that I have to pick the very first object.
First object, correct.
But in that we are additionally doing an iteration, and we are additionally we need to give that logic that you do a filter, then you apply that, then you pick the first object from that. But you can with the first with operator you can do it simply by using this particular function, first with function.
Okay.
So over here you can just provide your logic first with user and index. For example, if you can see user.name is Marino, so it will give you the first occurrence of that name. If that name is not existing, then the value of that or the output of that is null. Okay, so next move on okay, so this is an important thing for the quick hacks. So on the basis of my experience, like I have come across while working with DataWeave, there are quite challenging things that we come across, and we spend a lot of time analyzing them, how to make it or how to do it. So I would like to share with you guys couple of tricks and hacks that I have come across. So this is a very interesting one. So in this, the input of that is a list or a list of objects. So let's say if you can see, right, the input is the first name, April, and again the first name. So this is a list of objects I'm having. And what we want is we need to iterate through this object, do some transformation, but my resultant output should be an array. Right, my resultant output should be an object. So first thing is how can you iterate over an array? My first question is, do you guys have any suggestions like how we can iterate over an array? I think we just saw in a couple of slides, so maybe you can help me out here.
Map object using map.
Correct. That is one of the way, and that is one of the popular way, I would say. But the problem over here is that the map operator, the output of the map operator is again a list. Okay, but my requirement is that I don't want my output should not be a list. It should again be an object. So how can we achieve that? Any suggestions, or have you guys come across this? I mean, please refrain from looking at the screen and answering. But as per your experience or something you guys have come across.
So Sanjana, Rishabh and Jitendra is trying to say that we can use a single value selector. Rishabh is trying to say that we can use a reduce operator.
Mm-hmm.
And David, is this the answer first with for this question?
No, that was for some other thing.
Okay.
Previously.
Yes, got it.
Okay. Yeah. So good. There are a couple of options I can see, Supriya. So we can use, yes, we can use a reduce operator. Yes, we can use
For
that.
single value.
This was the other operator you mentioned, Supriya?
Single value selector. That's what Jitendra said.
Okay. The single value selector is only going to give me the first object, right? But my requirement is to convert this, parse this array. If there is any transformation, do that, and then convert it into an object. Okay, so yeah, reduce operator is one of the option. But do you really want to have that pain of writing that reduce operator and giving the logic to it? So one thing or one simple way that I can suggest you is using the magic of these curly braces. Okay, so I'm not talking about matching, but magic, but these curly braces or the brackets are of very much importance when we are writing any scripts, or particularly in cases of data weave as well. So you can see by the use of these curly braces how I am able to convert my array, output array, using a map operator into an object.
Rajiv, I think you said the flatten, but I think it converts in array itself, not the
Yeah, so the Rajiv, the flatten will come into picture when you are having multiple arrays, and you want to merge them into a single. And moreover, even the output of the flatten will be an array only. It will not be an object. Okay, good. We have some
Sanjana, just one question.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
here I can see both keywords are first name. So what happen if the keywords are different? Is it again going to be work, or is there any
Yeah.
issue?
So if you can see over here, right, in map operator, I have just given the $. That means whatever the key value pair is,
Keyword it
whatever
will come.
this object is, you print it. So even if my object name or the key name is different, it is going to print that, because I am not really
Okay.
parsing. I'm not doing $ dot something in this case.
Okay.
I'm just iterating through this array, and for now I'm just printing it as it is. But rather than having a list, I am converting it into object. So you can see, right, this structure is so complex. It is an array, then it is an object, then it is an object. And over here,
Okay.
this is an object with the list of all my inputs. So this is a very good example. Okay, let's
Thank
move
you.
on to the next one. Yeah, no problem. Next, move on to the next hack. So this is also very much interesting. So how to dynamically populate or read a value. Okay, so in couple of our complex cases, what we have is, like, for example, if you can see this, right? So this is my input array. It has two parameters. It is an object. It has two keys, first name and dynamic key. Now, generally, I can have some complex scenarios wherein the name of this key depends upon my input from some other payload. Right, there is one payload which I am reading, and on the basis of key from that payload, I need to read this payload. So for example, you can see that I want to have the dynamic, I want to read this value called as dynamic key, the value of this key, but the variable, but I don't know, my JSON is very very much dynamic. It is not static that I'm always going to have this key. This dynamic key in my next JSON can be called sometimes dynamic key 1 also. So how can we populate this value in runtime? So generally, if you do anything like payload.key, it will give you the key of those things. But how can we, in runtime, how can we populate this dynamic key value and read this? So for example, if you do something called as okay, let me write it in Notepad. Okay. So for example, if we, are you guys able to see the Notepad? Okay, so I have declared a variable named key. Okay, and its value is dynamic key, and you can see this is one of the key name in my input JSON. So if I do something like payload.key, correct? If I do payload.key, what do you think will be the output of this? Let's see it. Okay, just a minute. Let's open it. let's go here. Okay, and I will quickly type my input. First name and then we give this as an and I have declared a variable called as k over here, okay, which whose value is exactly this. So, and I want to call this key. I want to get the value from the payload for this particular key. Okay. Now, if I do key payload dot key, I'm going to get a null. Correct? Any cases why?
Because it's an object.
And particularly because our input is not having this key, nothing known as key. That's it, right? There is nothing. Had it been if my input is something like that, let's say if we do something like key, then we do okay. Now it is giving me 1 because there is a presence of this key. Okay, so now the question is how can we use this directly value? Now another thing if we try is, let's say if we do this thing, it will give us the value, but in some cases we are not sure about that. Like I said, right, one of our use case was pretty complex wherein we really did not know what key JSON key we are going to receive and we need to parse it. So we had to at runtime we have to populate the value of this into the payload from the payload and get it. So this is how you can do it. So just by using a $quote inside the variable name, you can actually at runtime replace the value of this variable. So it will at runtime, what will this result into is payload.dynamic key, and then you will get the value of the dynamic key.
Sanjana, I'm just curious to do one thing here. Can you just go on that DataWeave portal on the previous window? Can we just try once payload.key and putting key in the round bracket?
Yeah, okay. So, yeah.
And that is also kind of, I think.
So this is not a DataWeave expression. Yeah, correct. So I got your point. So you were thinking that just by writing that we will be able to replace this value at runtime. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
But that is it will not work that way because it will try to take it as a function and then populate it.
Yep.
But
how about specifying in using that P operator? Like if we specify in P, is it going to work?
So if you specify P operator, it is going to read from your property. And moreover, that property, if you're using the P operator,
like
first
here,
thing is it should be present in your property file, right? And the input that you give will be your property name. So you are saying like this. Okay? But that is not going to work because what your P operator is going to do is P operator is essentially going to read from your class files, like your property files or something like that.
okay, that's cool. Yep.
Yeah,
So
it's
new
the
to me.
simplest.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I had to spend a lot of time to understand this, so I thought of rather sharing it. Okay, so this is how you can dynamically populate the value of a variable at runtime by using a select operator. So yeah, guys, any other question? Do you guys have any other queries or questions? Sumit and Supriya, like, do we have any query?
No, Sanjana, I don't see any questions, but still, if you guys have any questions, as I mentioned, there will be a feedback form, or there you have our personal email IDs also. Please share it there. And before starting the quiz, I would like to I would like to request everybody to come on video, just for one picture. I'll Sanjana, you too?
Yeah.
And then in the end, speakers, please wait for the further follow-ups. Yeah. Yeah, some more people. Roshan, Deepak. Thank you, Jitendra. Thank you, Prasad. Vinit, thanks. So yeah, Vinit, is it possible to click one picture? Hey, David, hi. Spoke last Saturday, right? Yeah. Hi, Kirti. Yeah, fine. Is it done, guys? Yeah. Guys, is it done? Deepak? You are speaking on mute.
It's done. Yep.
Yeah, thank you. I hope the pictures are good. Yeah. Anyway, so let's move to the next part, which is a quiz. So I'll just start sharing my screen, and then I will give you one ID. So everybody knows this Kahoot IT, right? I'll give you the link here. In just one moment. And then there you have to add your game pin. So here I have pasted the link. I'm shortly pasting the pin. And after pressing the pin, please, I'll request all of you all to join. So here it is. Here is the pin. 2338035. I'll request speakers not to join this game. So we have Suman, we have Sai Charan. I hope my screen, let me share a screen. I need that for that. Yeah. Look into my screen. I think people have started joining. So we So as you know the Kahoot, I think you have to select the option and the time also counts. And
Supriya, sorry to cut you. Actually, the game voice is also coming and your voice is, so it's contradicting. So can you mute that game voice on the top right of the window here, or just get it low, because we are not able to hear you. So you can just again,
yes,
I think, repeat the instructions.
absolutely. I did it, Sumit. Now I hope it is good that you're able to hear me. Okay, fine. I think so many 29 people have joined so far. I'll request other people to also join. Like in all, we have 43 people. So fine, I'll just log this so nobody else can join this. I mean, or you still need a time. Sumit, can you check the window if people need a time to join this game?
I don't see any such comments. I think, yeah. So let's wait for 1 minute more. I think.
Yeah, Supriya, can you just come like how to join, because I was disconnected in between.
Absolutely, I will tell you. Absolutely, I will tell you.
Yeah.
Just one moment. So there is this Kahoot.it, like this. Okay. So it is Kahoot.it. You have to click on this, play, and then whatever pin number which I have inserted, you have to add it here. Okay. So I think we have 36 participants. That's huge and that's great. So the one who asked me the question, is it clear to you? Have you already joined in?
Pin?
2338035.
Okay, one second.
Okay. Okay, I think guys, let's just get started. Is it fine? So I am starting.
Yeah.
Please stay tuned. You will be able to see the question on my screen and then you have to answer the respective color. Oh, it is started, okay?
Two double three eight zero three.
Can you answer this? Choose the color. Choose the right color. Okay, fine. Okay, so I think Venkat is leading. Next question.
One more thing, the more you will be faster, the more you will get the points.
Guys, you need to be faster, quicker.
Yeah. Which data weave operator combines set of subarrays into single array? I think Sanjana has said this 10 times.
If you guys were listening,
Okay, that's great. Next question. And we'll also see who's, I think Venkat, Suman, Anjali, they are like buck up guys. Now there is a true false question. Lookup operation can call a subflow. True or false? That's great. Still Venkat is leading. Now there is another true false. Query parameter is used to identify specific resource. Okay. Jitin is on top. Venkat, buck up. Which data weave function is used to extract the first matching element from the array? Okay, that's great. Six, which keyword is used to refer resource type? Venkat is on top again.
okay.
So seven questions. Spec-driven development lifecycle includes what it includes? Right options, 4 right options. Okay. 8th question. Spec-driven development, which is below, not a part of spec-driven development. Okay. Index can be referred as dash in data weave. Easy, I think.
We have
But
enough
confusing.
answers for this one.
Yeah. So still, I think like people got it mistaken with the dollar sign. But yeah, that's the game. I think Venkat is still on top. Now the last question. Which operator is an anthem to map object is similar but returns an object instead of an array? Returns the object, not the array. That's great. Okay, so I think this was the last
Yes. Supriya.
Jitin, Ravi, Venkat, I guess. So yeah, I think I request Venkat, Ravi, correct? Am I like taking the right names? I request you to send your email IDs to me. Okay, Ravi, Thorve, Venkat, Sai, and Jitin. Kindly please share me your email IDs. Hello, am I audible?
You repeat the name again.
Yes, you are audible.
Supriya, can you repeat the names again?
Wait for a minute.